Good. Go.
Okay. All right, starting over again. Welcome everybody. This is Show and Tell Night at the Virginia Train Collectors Association. We have train show treasures out front here for everybody to see. We'll also be showing a short film on the Southern Railway Saluda Grade. Not active, but it has a pretty good history behind it. So that being the case, anybody want to start first up here with the stuff?
No, we're going to start with a Saluda.
Oh, we're going to start with the film. Okay, very good.
Hi, I'm John Wheeler, and at our last board meeting, I was talking to some people on the board about growing up in Western North Carolina. Move over. Okay. And I grew up in a place called Tryon, North Carolina, up in the mountains. And one of our members said, well, you need to give a presentation on something that's very famous about Tryon, North Carolina, which is the Saluda Grade. Saluda Grade is or was the highest grade of any railroad in the United States for its day, because it comes up from Spartanburg, South Carolina, up to Asheville, North Carolina, carrying wood chips up, some old trains.
Okay.
I got trains that are as old as I am, and I'm over 80 years old, so you're old. And then I got some trains that are a little bit younger, and there are people that collect all different
This is
engagements
closer
of
to
trains.
windows.
And then there are people who are interested in real railroad trains. And we have a lot of people in this club that are very knowledgeable, particularly about Virginia trains, but about all sorts of trains. And so I wanted to share a little bit about the history of my hometown. Tryon sits right on the South Carolina-North Carolina border, and it's the first town into the escarpment, which is the mountains. And the escarpment means that you don't have a gradual rise into the mountains, you have a cliff-like rise into the mountains. And so the difficulty in trying to get trains to go up that mountain and down that mountain was this tremendous rise and fall in the railroad, particularly in the days when steam engines were prevalent and when they didn't have dynamic braking and things that we have today. Tryon was the start of the Saluda Grade, and Saluda is at the top of the mountain, Saluda, North Carolina. Further down is Spartanburg, South Carolina, further up is Asheville, North Carolina. And in order to get that train up the mountain, they had to create another town in the middle called Melrose. And the purpose of that train was, once the train got up about a quarter of the way, it couldn't get any further without more help. So they created a station about halfway up where they had push trains that would help the locomotives get up further up the mountain. And I've got a nice film that shows that, and I hope you'll enjoy it. I remember when I was a boy, the trains, when they're going up the mountain, were pretty slow. And we could run along as kids. Don't take my recommendation for doing this, because it was pretty stupid, frankly. But we would jump on the trains and ride on up to Melrose. And conductors weren't too pleased with us, but they knew they couldn't stop us. So I have great memories of growing up next to a railroad. I owned a piece of property at Horseshoe Curve on the Saluda Grade. Most train runs have a horseshoe curve somewhere in that run, but we had that in Tryon as well. So this particular film shows the town of Saluda, North Carolina, which is at the top of the grade. And it has a museum there to celebrate this particular run. If you go further up into Chattanooga, Tennessee, there's a tremendous train museum there that I would recommend anybody that loves real trains could go to. It's one of the finest museums around for the old steamers, particularly the late model ones that are huge, made in Lima, Ohio. So anyway, let's start the film, and then we can talk a little bit more about it. I should say one more thing. This thing was built by convict labor partially. It took years to do it. I think there's going to be a picture in it showing all these convicts.
There you go. Oh, okay. Okay.
Not all the way.
In the words of steam locomotive engineer Rich Melvin,
Every division we've ever gone to everywhere has the hill.
every division has a hill somewhere that's called the ruling grade. It's the steepest hill on that piece of the railroad. And it's a daily operating obstacle for the railroad running heavy freight trains.
For western North Carolina, that hill is Saluda Grade. Spanning 2.7 miles from the bottom of the grade at Melrose to the crest at Peace's Crossing in downtown Saluda, the Mountain of Challenge averages an estimated gradient of 4.7%, peaking at 5.1% while gaining an elevation of 606 feet. With the grade rail banked since 2001, the city of Saluda hasn't seen rail traffic in over 20 years, but the residents of this great community still remember the trains. What was once a bustling mainline railroad between Asheville, North Carolina and Spartanburg, South Carolina is now a lonely, idle stretch of mountainous railroad. Covered in kudzu with multiple track washouts, Saluda Grade is slowly being reclaimed by Mother Nature.
The Saluda Grade is famous because this 3 miles that starts here and goes up the hill to Saluda is the steepest commercial standard gauge railroad in the country. The last train through here was in 2001. It's been shut down for economic reasons since then. However, for the 120 years that they ran trains up here, it was highly significant because you ended up with old steam engines back in 1878, which didn't like anything steeper than 2%. This has one section which is reported to be 5.1% and on average 4.7%. And it was surveyed in 1870s by a couple gentlemen. One of them was Thaddeus Coleman and the other one was Captain Pearson. Captain Charles Pearson was the surveyor, and he had an extremely good eye for these mountain lands. And many people, whenever they were trying to get a railroad from Spartanburg to Asheville, would say, follow the Green River up, go up around White Oak Mountain. And he just merely would say, the ground is no good over there. And whenever the 1970s that they were putting in the interstate highway system, I-26, it was delayed for years to try to figure out how to get that section of mountain to hold just merely an interstate highway system, whereas Captain Pearson 100 years earlier knew the underground flow of the water and the sandstone and could say that land is no good for a railroad. So therefore, for that economic reasons, he chose this. And so then with that kind of challenge, the Saluda Grade became a reality. That was very good for the town of Saluda because Saluda has always had a history of being the gateways of the Blue Ridge. There is what is called the Blue Ridge escarpment through here. So that in this particular lay of land, there is no foothills to wind up. It's almost like coming up a cliff. The town of Tryon is only 10 miles down the track, and Tryon is 1,000 foot lower in elevation than Saluda. And so then they knew when they put the train track in that they were representing a significant challenge to the old steam engines. They did it primarily because they wanted a line from Spartanburg to Asheville. Now, back in the 1870s, railroads were put in by small companies that would get the right to sell stock and then provide track just over a reasonably short section of line. So then this initially started out as the Spartanburg-Asheville Railroad. They got it surveyed, they laid the track, and then they went broke. And so then it became the Asheville-Spartanburg Railroad. The first train up these tracks was in July 4th of 1878. 3 years later, since the railroad always referred to this stretch as going up Saluda Mountain, that the town of Paces Gap chartered with North Carolina as Saluda. Now, coming up to Saluda, since Saluda was the easternmost point on the Blue Ridge itself, that drovers, people trying to get their goods down to the Piedmont area would stop in Saluda, and this was the last stop on this train line for the first year. It took them another year to get the train track to Hendersonville. It took them another 10 years to get them to Asheville. And so then with the passenger trains coming up to Saluda, you would have people that suddenly realized that if they were from Charleston, say in the summertime, not only can we sleep, but we can also breathe. That continued on. I think the railroad found that people were very interested in the tourism aspects in this area. In fact, there was one special line that was just run from Hendersonville to Highlands to take people strictly to Lake Toxaway. So then it was very important not only to move freight, but also moving people was one of the primary products of this railroad that went through here. Now, original trains that would come up here, since we're at the bottom of the grade and that they were well aware that this was a significant challenge, would stop here in the non-existent town of Melrose. It's just Melrose Station. But here, that they would put on what's called a helper engine. And the helper engine would go to the rear of the train and help push up the grade. Another way that you could get a longer freight train up the grade would be to split it up and divide it into halves or thirds and take it up a third at a time. Now that went on for a good number of years. In fact, it was even going on in the 1990s. So then if you think of having to split up a train into thirds to make it up the grade, that really is kind of no way to run a railroad. They would run and make it up in fine style, but there was a few problems that could come out. One is if you were trying to make it up the grade and then through mechanical difficulties lost brakes, you could have a runaway coming down through here backwards. A significant one of those occurred in 1903. But one of the primary difficulties was coming down from Saluda and having mechanical difficulties and losing the brakes. That would create coming through this area as a runaway in the neighborhood of 60 to 75 miles an hour. Since the speed limit on the grade was only 8 miles an hour, that was a pretty bad feeling.
Near the turn of the 20th century, larger steam locomotives like the KS 280 consolidation behind me greatly enhanced operational capabilities up the mountain of challenge. Around the 19-teens, heavier 282 Mikado type steam locomotives, much like Southern Railway 4501, which is also preserved here at the Tennessee Valley Railroad Museum, handled much of the traffic up the grade. But it wasn't until the 1930s that Southern Railway's 210-2s, Santa Fe type steam locomotives, handled much of the traffic up the grade. Another one of the exciting steam locomotives seen on Saluda Grade during that time were the heavy 2882 steam locomotives from the LS1 and LS2 class. These heavy articulated steam locomotives handled some of the heaviest trains up Saluda Mountain.
The railroad had the kind of macho image that a good engineer stays with this train, doesn't get off. In Saluda, on this grade, that in the first 25 years of operation that they had lost just under 30 employees based on runaways. And they knew that something had to be done. The railroad became part of the Southern Railroad in 1894, and they were very concerned with the problems of these runaways. They put out what I refer to as an all-points bulletin to their employees saying that we need to enhance the safety of the Saluda Grade or we're going to have to shut it down. Pitt Ballou was the engineer on the first wreck of the summer of 1903. He was in the hospital trying to recover from a broken back and came up with the idea that gravity got us into this problem, maybe gravity can get us out. And so then he called in the maintenance supervision of the Southern Railroad and explained to them the concept of a runoff track, a safety runoff track. These were implemented in the same year. When you consider that he came up with the idea in August and they were operational by December, that the Southern Railroad took that suggestion very, very seriously. We are standing at the second runoff track. It happens to be this. It's 1,600 feet long and has a grade up the mountain of between 10 and 11%. Many a train took the runoff track and did not wreck. The primary way that they would signal that, particularly back in the early 1900s, was that here we have a switch house where there would be a switchman standing in that, and as the train came down, 3 blasts on his horn said, "I'm coming in and I am under control." At that time, the guy in the switch house closed the switch to the main line. If there was a miscommunication there, you would end up with the free ride up the runoff track. That went on until the 1950s. 1950s, the diesels were introduced as the prime mover for the railroads. They were more forgiving to the steepness of the grade. Because of that, the Southern Railroad felt that it was safe to pull up safety runoff track number 1, which is 1.5 miles behind me. They did that just fine, but on this one, they kept an electronic control on the switch so that if you came through a timing section, which is just 0.5 mile behind me, faster than 8 miles an hour, you automatically went up the runoff ramp. Now, there was one train, particularly in 1971, one of the last serious wrecks was a coal train coming down, lost the brakes, out of control, hit the runoff track, and right where we are standing here, 3 of the engines rolled over. But it was enough to move things over such that by the next day that they had the main line operational. And fortunately, there was no one seriously hurt during that wreck. So even in 1971, the safety runoff tracks were doing their thing. And we remind our patrons at the museum that these safety runoff tracks were Saluda's contribution to the interstate highway system just 120 years earlier.
I know the heart of those engineers. They did not want to give it up. They wanted to conquer it. We learned building highways from railroad curves to line up all of our highways. I actually used them for the first 10 years of my career laying out new highways in Texas. You see these safety tracks that we're standing on, they were the very first. They had to have something in order to keep this functional and operational for the next 100+ years. These become a reality, and the same situation on the highways. We are responsible for trying to minimize not only the impacts to our system, but most importantly to those that use them. So this is a legacy. Number 1 and number 2, safety tracks, now known as runaway rails.
Okay, so this goes on for quite a while, and I wanted to mention to you that anybody interested in the Saluda Grade and in the Southern Railway mountainous routes, this is route number W they called it, there are plenty of films available about it on the internet. Can you imagine now one of those engines toppling over and the engineer and the fireman jumping off the train to try to not be killed? There were 3 major accidents in 1903 where there was a lot of loss of life. But for the railroad, just as significantly, losing those engines was tremendously expensive. You can imagine the cost of these engines back in those days, and actually even more recently. The diesels were more forgiving because instead of them being based on steam engines, which would vibrate up like that, they had a smooth engine, which made it made the wheels better traction on the thing. And they also had what is called dynamic braking, which is a significantly better braking system. So growing up in this part of the country was a real thrill for me, and the train was important. If you go down to Spartanburg, Landrum, South Carolina, all the towns along that route, through Tryon, up to Melrose, and up to Saluda, and into Hendersonville, North Carolina, all those railroad tracks remind you of Ashland. They all run right through the center of town, and basically you can see that those towns were built on the history of the railroad and the commerce that it brought. Not only did they do a lot of freight traffic, which is really the most dangerous part of it, imagine trying to bring all that coal up that grade, but there was a lot of passenger traffic, and he mentioned tourism.
Going to Asheville.
Both Tryon and Saluda, and then further up, Hendersonville and Asheville became great tourist towns, all the way back to the 1800s, which brought a lot of money, a lot of character, a lot of artists, a lot of writers, a lot of really interesting people to Western North Carolina.
Money people.
And it was a real pleasure for me growing up among all of that. And I missed the train, and one of the last runs, I have a video of it that's separate, was where you could buy a ticket on the last train going up the mountain, which was a diesel, but the diesel was not the only train there. They had this gigantic steam engine pulling the whole thing as well. So it was a real thrill for us to be able to grow up with that. I grew up with it right next to my house, and then later on bought a piece of property where the train would go by. They used to have a spray train that would spray the kudzu off the track. And now you can see in many places in the summer the kudzu just covers the track. They also had cars that would ride along the track on the rails to help maintain the property. So it's a very interesting part of our lives growing up there. I know Curtis has talked about growing up next to railroads and enjoying that. But if you're ever down in that section of the country, I encourage you to go by there and go to the museums that are all throughout that part of the country. Saluda has particularly turned into a huge tourist town. Triad always was, by the way. And the museum there is really, really fun because the people that man that museum are still people that remember the trains and grew up with them. So, and many of their fathers and grandfathers worked on the train system. Anybody have any questions about the Saluda Grade? The steepest grade in the United States. All gone. Not the only famous railroad grade that has gone. Many of the grades have passed into history. But this one, for us who grew up with it, is kind of sad. Like losing an old friend. All right?
So,
Yeah.
I was going to say a lot of railroads, when they kind of went out of business, they got into excursion business, maybe.
Into what? I'm sorry?
Excursion
businesses?
Little revenue.
Well, they're talking, there's been talk about bringing the grade back. That will never happen. It's just too expensive. So what they're going to try to do is develop what is called a rail trail, where people can bike up the mountain, walk up the mountain, develop real estate along the route as well. That'd be the way to make money doing it. Even that.
To the Washington Old Dominion, I'm a fan of that railroad.
Yeah.
I used to play above it when it was still running. But by that time, it was owned by the C&O. They took it over, and their last revenue was hauling sand and rebar, put runways out.
The history of railroads in the United States is a fascinating subject. I know some of you are specialists in that. And anyway, I enjoyed my childhood there.
one question and a comment. So, was there a train station in Saluda where they would stop, passengers get
Yes.
on and get off?
Absolutely.
Is that pretty busy?
Well, passenger trains were safer because they were lighter. And Saluda, Tryon, not Melrose, because Melrose was just that helper engine place. And Saluda, and then further up into Hendersonville, North Carolina, and then Asheville, they all became tourist towns. So there was a lot of passenger traffic, and he mentioned it in the film. I can remember even in the 50s when I was growing up, a lot of people from Georgia and Florida would come up to Tryon and up to Saluda because it was cool in the evenings. In fact, in the evenings, you'd often have to wear a sweater at night. So he mentioned you could sleep or breathe.
And then as a comment, you would know the area better than I do, but my childhood friend has a place in Glenville, Lake Glenville, which is not too far away from Highlands and Cashiers.
Right, that's much further up.
And that's a TVA lake. So they mentioned Lake Toxaway. So that area changed dramatically, not only with the railroads, but also with the
TVA.
TVA
Yeah.
changed it a lot.
That's a man-made lake as well. All the lakes in North Carolina are pretty much man-made. One of the things that he didn't really mention, I have photographs of this, is all these prisoners in the striped uniforms who worked on that railroad. Many also died on that railroad. And where I had a piece of property, right next to the piece of property was this graveyard. And the only thing that marked these graves was just a stone. Nothing written on the stone, just a stone. But literally hundreds of people died building that railroad. Later on in the 90s, the Interstate Highway 26, when they had a torrential rainstorm, collapsed. The whole thing collapsed. So what he was mentioning is that you go straight up the mountain, you have hard ground. You go around, it's all sandy. And Interstate 26, literally, the whole interstate just fell apart, collapsed, which was pretty bad. I could just imagine riding down that track in a train and losing control of it at 75 miles an hour, and then jumping off this thing, which must have been 2 stories up above the ground.
And then having to roll over on you.
There's a lot of tragic accidents about it.
So that tourism left over, my aunt bought a cabin right off of Saluda, and you crossed over into North Carolina, and you got off at the first exit on 26, and then you went down 13 switchbacks, and at each side of the switchback there was a cabin, and then another switchback, and another cabin, and another cabin, and another switchback, and another cabin, and another cabin, until you got all the way. And I think there was a total of like 18 switchbacks to actually get to the creek at the bottom where a lot of kayakers like to go. I'm guessing that was one of the outlet creeks
These are
from
roads.
the
This is a road, not a
dams.
railroad.
Yeah.
I remember growing up in
So
the
you say
50s,
switchback,
a lot of the people that lived there would heat their homes with coal,
Yeah.
and a lot of the kids would go up and
Road just
throw coal off the train.
Oh,
Take it
yeah.
home.
Oh, that happened everywhere.
Yeah,
Fulton Yard,
I'm
yeah.
sure. Anyway,
Kids did
it's my
it.
pleasure to present the Saluda Grade.
You were gonna say-
All right then, we shall get the, excuse me, show and tell underway. I guess I'm the closest to my stuff, so I'll start it. Okay, the whole point is train show and tells. And the nice thing about show and tells or train shows, or what we bring here, is sometimes it's almost a case of you don't really find the article finds you. So anyway, I've got 2 of mine. I wore an appropriate shirt to go with them
Yeah,
tonight.
you found it.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
All right, so in front, I found this at one of the VTCA shows, one of the ones up in Charlottesville. It's quite a while back. I think this is one that they used to hold at the VFW or American Legion Hall up there. But anyway, it's a Lionel,
Jersey Central.
Jersey Central Fairbanks Works Trainmaster. Being a Jersey Central fan, I try to grab them when I find them. And anyway, what I liked about this one here, it was a prototypically correct paint scheme on it.
Good.
Now Lionel, in their 50s version, and some other outfits when they put them out later on, used a non-prototypical orange and blue one. Why Lionel did that back in the 50s, I have no idea. Jersey Central yards were right down the street from them, more
Well,
or
they probably
less.
had black and white photographs, and somebody just used their
Who knows?
imagination to.
They could have taken a trolley
do
down to
that.
Jersey City and looked for this. But anyway, so this is prototypically correct, so it automatically got my attention.
Yeah.
And I didn't find out till several years later that this is kind of unique. This was put out for it was a special run of engines, cars, and cabooses put out for the Statue of Liberty Centennial in 1986.
Oh.
I wasn't into trains at the time, so I had no idea this existed. I just thought it was a cool looking engine. The price was right, and I bought it. And again, years later, I found out it was put out for the Statue of Liberty Centennial. I said, "Oh boy, how lucky can you get?" I didn't do a thing to it. I run it on occasion, and it's got the old beepity beep horn on the inside as opposed to modern electronics. So I thought about upgrading the horn, but I figured, no, it's kind of cool and cute the way it is. So I'm just going to leave it like it is. Goes around the track, and I hit the horn, beep beep. So I said, okay, we'll leave that. Cool. Now the second one is, this one's a Williams product. GP9, again in Jersey Central markings. I found this at a Greenberg show, maybe about 2014, 2015. I knew Bachman had bought Williams, and their line was starting to disappear. These weren't being made anymore. So when I saw one at a Greenberg show, and again, the price was very good on it, I grabbed it. And I'm glad I did, because you can't get them now. And the nice thing, and the interesting thing about, especially Jersey Central stuff, things like this disappear into New Jersey basements once they hit the market, never to be seen again for decades. And with about 1,200 people per square mile up in New Jersey, bound to be some O-gauges in that pile, and that's where all the O-gauge Jersey Central stuff disappears to. This, again, is a very good runner. I had to do a little modification on it. Like a lot of Williams twin motor diesels, it tends to take off like a rocket when you first put the power to it, but it's easily tamed. Wire the motors in series and it calms them right down. So nice and smooth operation on it. So both of these were very good. I was very lucky to find these. Glad I got them, and they ain't going anywhere for the time being. So that's it. Bill, I think yours is next, so why don't you come on up?
Mr. Crow.
Well, as the club's only aficionado of O scale that I'm aware of at this time, I'm going to try not to bore you with some of these things if you're not too interested in, but I'll just tell you what I found in New York. We went this time, and I didn't have anything particular in mind to look for, so I said, well, just roll around, see what I find, whatever. And so I turned the corner and looked on a table, and sure enough, I saw an Athearn O-scale kit. And the other end says B&O Time Saver box, A176, which is the catalog number. So it is in the original box, and this one I checked very carefully. It's unusual today to find them with everything there. A lot of times people have gone through these kits and taken parts out to fix something else, you know, and so you end up with some parts and not all of it. This one at least is complete, and you probably have seen Lionel's version of this car. It was a very popular 64 car in the 50s. And,
Are they metal sides?
Yes, these are metal sides.
Cool.
Tin sides. And the ends are tin, and you build a wooden frame box to put it on. So this was a nice purchase I found, which was complete. And I'm not sure whether I'm going to build it or not, because I already have one. But I couldn't resist it since it was all there. So that was a good find. And then this is another later version of the Athearn O-scale box after it was initially sold in 1960. And so these trains and these boxes are called Athearn O-gauge kits by Pacific HO. Pacific HO was an HO company, and they bought the rights to the Athearn line, all the tooling and all that business. So it says a reefer, but as I told you, sometimes you don't get the whole picture. And what you don't get when you buy this one is the sides. So, nevertheless, I can use the parts. They're all in good shape, and some still in the original envelopes. So this is one somebody has done a little scavenging through, but I'll do some more as time goes on. The parts that are there are good. And about money, you know, I thought I would probably end up spending some money at York this time, because my want list is pretty short. And when it gets pretty short, it means you've gotten to the top of the pile, and you're not going to find anything that you want that's any significance for $5. So anyway, these two kits, this one which has got everything there and has the original box, and then this one's about 2/3 of a kit or something. I got these for like $6 a piece from two different people. So my budget was still intact when I went into the silver hall and got down that long first row on the left when you go in from the blue hall part of the building. And I got down near the bottom and turned the corner there, and this is sitting on a shelf. So the guy had a rack there, like 3 levels. And this was sitting on the shelf, and I looked at it, and I said, wow, I've never seen a box like this before, ever. I've been in O-scale 45, 48 years now. And this is a company I've never heard of, and I asked everybody I could think of up there that knows anything about O-scale, and they had never heard of it either. So I don't know, that doesn't mean it's worth something. It just means it's obviously very difficult to find. So I bought this, and the guy had $5 on it, and he said, I didn't know he was pulling my leg. He said this is an economy kit. And I said, well, what do you mean by that? He said, well, open it up. He said, you'll see. Incidentally, the name of this company was Kansas City Kit. That's it, Kansas City Kit. It says O gauge, and it gives owner's name, E.A. Simmons, and the street address, which the last 3 letters are wiped out of, Kansas City, Kansas. So, anyway, I'm sorry the tape got over this end, but I guess he did that to save the box. At least it's all there. But,
Did that keep the label from falling off?
and as I said, I'm putting my tentacles out to see if I can find everything right. I opened the box, and this is all that's in there. This,
Oh, that's cool. No. A lot of work. What is
some
that?
little sticks that I haven't opened. This package looks like railroad ties. And
Sample.
the plans and the instructions of how to assemble this thing, of which the only parts there are this. So I hummed and hawed about it. I said, well, you know, I'm looking for maybe a little bit of a challenge. So that's why I don't turn down these parts boxes that I buy, because I figure one way or another I can find some more parts to make it into a car. I need a frame, and I have built frames out of wood before, but that's a task that beyond my, I won't say ability at this point, but beyond my patience at this point. So I'm gonna swap a frame from something else. I'll find a frame that will fit it. And this is
Bill,
what,
we can give you the one we just found in the box, and the tanker frame is looking good, and the wires all around the tanker looking good, and the white part plastic of the tanker is all melted.
oh,
So I got a frame for you.
well, if it's the right length, I'll
So you
take
have a
it.
frame with a melted tanker?
With a
melted tank.
melted plastic white tank in there, and but the rest
It
of it's good.
might work.
All right, it's
If
free.
it fits, I'm just gonna kind of, I've got a couple of Lionel frames, I'm gonna try that first, see if that works. Anyway, I'll bring this back sometime next year when I get it finished and show it to you, what I was able to do with it, if anything. So, let's see. Then the last thing, I think people sometimes laugh when I show them things like that and say I'm gonna do something with it. I meant to try to get in touch with Lucas. Lucas has got one of my last production items, but I didn't call him in time to bring it. But anyway, here's what I do with old young cars like that. I love the local companies, and I happen to have made a habit of grabbing decals for those companies through the years so that one day I could do this kind of thing with them. So this is an old Lionel. It was a pre-war car, and 2957, I guess it was, or 55, I forgot the number. Anyway, so this one was in bad shape, and I had to buy ladders for it, find ladders, and took a frame off another one, put scale trucks on it, scale couplers, and so voila, a beautiful new, brand new tank car. Lucas, maybe you can bring yours one night and show them. I had one to Lucas. So anyway, that was my York, and I came home satisfied with only one thing that I don't like. That is, I bought a tender for an American Fly engine. I have a pre-war one, the Northern.
Now that car, did you paint and decal that one, or?
Decaled it, yeah.
Okay.
Painted and decaled it, yeah. Yeah, Allied Chemical,
You did that.
yeah. My dad worked there during the war, so this was a little special meaning for me. The World War II, that was.
Cool.
He loved to tell the stories about that. He worked for Hercules Powder Company down there in Hopewell. And we lived in Petersburg, and they couldn't get gas for cars or anything, so they would form these carpools that would go from Petersburg to the plant down there. And he said sometimes they ended up working, they worked 16 hours straight from 8 in the morning until midnight that night.
Actually, Ricky's
Get
got
8 hours off to go home, get a shower, eat something, and hopefully grab a little sleep, and then be back at work at 4 that afternoon. And then they'd work 16 hours from that. And he did this for 4.5 years.
It'd be good if they
But,
could kids do some of that.
he always said, when he finally passed away at a fairly early age, he said, that's what killed me. He said, I know that's what killed me. He said, there was no way to do that. You just went on energy you didn't have, you know. So anyway, that's why the Allied Chemical, they.
Well, before you leave, tell everybody what happened on Friday night at York.
It got dark.
Very dark.
Got dark. Yeah.
Bill,
Yeah.
you started to say something about a pre-war flyer tender?
Yeah, the tender. I found a tender down there. And the problem is, when I got home, I was with Bill Wright, and I'm a little suspicious because I can't find it. And he says he doesn't know anything about it. So I don't know. It's a valuable tender. I mean, I don't know. Of course, we know Bill wouldn't do anything like that. But anyway, so I don't know where my tender is. He's going to look under his front seat. So
A tender for what?
a tender for American Flyer Northern pre-war.
Oh, yes, that's that.
Yeah, 3/16 so good.
Right, yes.
Yeah. So anyway,
which was from the Alan Carroll estate years ago. He and my mother traveled to Europe several times, and most of them are European. There are some American stamps. I think this is American. But there are some very unusual countries in here that you wouldn't normally see. Romania, Bulgaria, Monaco, San Marino. He was my mother's friend, boyfriend, something, don't know, for quite a long time, dying, early member of TCA, had a 3-digit number, died in 2009. And I thought people could look at it. It's very interesting because there's all sorts of engines in it. It's a, it's available.
You flip some pages.
What year roughly were these travels taking place?
These were probably taking place in the 1980s, but I see a few stamps here that are much older. Like these American stamps. These 3-cent stamps are not 1980s.
Ricky, what was his name?
Alan Carroll, he was a member of TCA. He knew a lot of the early members from this area, like Jimmy Crone and Colonel Stockton.
Train stamps.
Train stamps.
Train stamps. So,
Okay, I see that.
Recent stamp, I remember from the
Yep.
50s.
Turn
yeah,
the page.
Monaco. And somewhere San Marino is in here. It's a little European country.
Crazy about it.
Bigger than
Monaco had some
Monaco.
really beautiful stamps.
So it's available. If someone wants to talk to me about it.
I mean, for sale?
Yes.
Ah.
And you get a leather bind.
Okay, George, we'll get them.
First, I want to thank everybody for coming. I had a bet, thought that 15, 17 people would be here tonight, but I think we're over 30, so that's pretty good. Lived within a block here until several years ago. So here it is, York, up as usual, Tuesday afternoon, and we're going through the Wyndham Ballroom, where the high-end standard gauge and O gauge people are. And I come across this $5.93, boxed, metal, pre-war metal, switch tower. So the question is this. The catalog shows, or no, I shouldn't say this. The catalog shows and describes from 46 through 54 a white and red tower like this with green roof. Okay? Pre-war was yellow and brown. Greenberg says that for the first 2 years, the brown and the yellow was made and not the red and white. The question is, who is correct? It appears to be, S-gauge I don't think was ever made with this sheet metal where you had these, where you had little connections on top, the electrical connections on top. But anyway, so the question is, for the Brain Trust, is this S-gauge or is it O-gauge? And the only determination would really either be the color, whether that color was made after the war. One person, Bill Crow, said earlier today that this is a pre-war label, but these pre-war labels were used well into the post-war period. So that by itself, I have a red and white one that has the exact same box. But that's the question.
Think it was like a holdover from.
Right. Yes. Yes.
Holdover from
right.
pre-war to
right.
post-war.
Right.
Okay.
Is the scale the same?
Yes, it's identical.
Yes.
Just a matter of the color.
The metal roof
Yes.
and wooden. Is that metal too?
Yeah, everything's
metal.
right. Then in '55 they bought plastic build.
Right.
And that's the only technical plastic. The plastic build plant never had anything electrical in it. So Flyer bought the plastic, much more realistic, the plastic build signal towers from plastic build, assembled them in the Gilbert plant and put a little electric light in it. They're quite valuable because they only made 2 years. That's it.
Hello, I'm Hill Carter, and usually with George and another friend, we have a table in the Silver Hall, and it's always fun to see the BGCA people do there, and usually we have meetings and get together, so it's a lot of fun. Appreciate your patronage at our table.
But we always know where to find you.
I probably have everything I need, and I go up there and pretty much stay with the table. George does all the running around buying stuff, but I like the pre-shows, and Bob, I appreciate it. Post-war, Lionel HO, the right color box, evokes a lot of memories. And then the C&O, like John Wheeler was talking, really brought back memories, because we have a farm right outside of Ashland that the Piedmont division of the C&O goes through the middle of. And I grew up on that farm. My great uncle farmed it. He had cattle, and he said some years he made more money on the dead cattle on the tracks and charging the C&O for that than he actually made on the crops and on the raising them. But I grew up with these colors coming through there. I didn't take pictures like I should have. That was coming about 10 years later. It's an Alco. As far as I know, they never had an Alco engine on that division. Most of them were EMD. But the colors are right. So it just struck me as, I've got to have that. I'm going to take it to the farm, put it somewhere, and it'll be there forever. And it kind of points out that sometimes it's not the rarity of something, it's the memories that they evoke. And that goes with the people in the book, too. The other thing, and I had to have this for my train room, I don't know if you saw it, it was in the fire house with the there's one Mark's table in with all the American Flyer, and she had this in there. It's $10. Had to have it for the train room. I'll read it. And you've probably seen it. It says, "Warning: contagious. train collector's disease. Adult males very susceptible. Symptoms: continual complaint as to need for a constructive hobby. Patient has blank expression, sometimes deaf to wife and kids. Always haunts secondhand stores, can't pass garage sales or flea markets, often found at train meets mumbling, quote, "I should have seen it before the other guy bought it." There's no known cure, but the disease is not fatal. And that's not exactly true if your wife is not understanding of the disease. And then visit hobby dealer. Add a new piece to collection as often as possible. But I had to have that for the training. So, thank you all.
I'm Curtis Hofstetter, and I'm going to behave tonight. I'm not going to go off the topic. We're on a time constraint. Curtis, we only have an hour and a half left. Oh, you do? Okay. I went to York. The first time I went was in the spring of '82. I've told you that. Well, I'm happy to say that I was able to go this time. And as usual, there wasn't anything in the way of tin litho trolleys that I saw that I needed. In fact, I hardly saw any. So I ended up thinking, well, what can I bring tonight in my shoebox? Because, well, went back to Super Shoes, scored another pair, got them on sale for $49. But anyway, the exciting thing is that when I see something at auction, whether it's here or in Germany or wherever, I bid when I call. They call me and I bid on live. Well, the last item I got, trolley-wise, was the trolley that I'm going to show you last. But the first one I want to set up. Jim Crone, who we mentioned, Ricky mentioned him. Jim's responsible for me getting into train collecting and responsible for a lot of things in my life, Jim was. And he was friends with Ward Kimball. Now, in train collecting back in Jim's era, Ward Kimball had probably the best train collection ever, or at least one of the very diverse and one-of-a-kind pieces. Ward Kimball was Disney's animator. He did the Jiminy Cricket. That was his creation. And I had a chance, because he was Jim's friend, to meet Ward. Well, after Ward passed, about a year and a half later, his family allowed Noel Barrett from Cartersville up in Pennsylvania to sell his collection. It was a two-part collection held in Philadelphia at the airport hotel. And I went to both of them. Well, the first one, I went to, I bought several pieces of Ward's. I'm not going to tell you what they are, because I might want to show them to you later. But this was Ward's trolley. It's tin litho. I think it's really quite interesting, and since I'm such a tin litho appreciative, is that a word, George? Appreciative? It works, okay. I really like it. You can see when you look at the headlights how the way they did the design to show the perspective, that it would stick out from the body. But I had never seen an Italian-made toy trolley. I have German, I have French, I have American, I have a couple of Brazilian, but I never had an Italian. And so I thought, well, here Ward had an Italian trolley. It was made by the INGAP, I-N-G-A-P, that stands for National Automatic Toy Industry in Padua. Padua is in northern Italy, and they're known for the sacred saint of Saint Anthony. The reason I know that is that
where I grew up, there were a lot of Italians, Greeks, Germans, Swiss, English, just a melting pot just outside of Washington, D.C. So I got to learn a lot. I got to learn a lot of languages that weren't true Italian. It was broken Italian and English. So I remember this older Italian lady. Every time she'd lose something in the yard, she'd go, "Oh, Saint Anthony, find it for me." Saint Anthony was the saint of finding lost items. So it was something really important. She'd get pretty animated. So this is where this was made, and where the church for Saint Anthony is. So I was very happy to get this. Now, the only way I can find a trolley that I don't have is if I buy it at auction. And I buy pieces from Lankes, Lankes, it's German. And this is also made by Ingap. But you can tell, well, it's electric, whereas this is mechanical, has a wind-up clockwork. This is the deluxe. This is your back and forward, has a light bulb, picks up, third rail. But this has hardly been played with. But the thing I like about tin litho, you all remember Bill Uhays and I had a little joke about patina, but I love the way paint will over time get that sort of aged look with the patina. And the lithography will do the same thing because it was simply paint or ink, combination thereof, that went onto the tin. And if you really study this thing, it's really quite lovely the way the colors work. It's got the thing, and it's got these little numbers on there.
People inside?
And
people inside?
Yes, and there are people inside. And it was interesting because when I got it, one of the people had come out. And so I thought about putting it back in, but the problem is you can't put it back in unless you take the bottom off to get to the top, because you can't get to the tabs in the roof. So where the little guy that should be sitting right there, he sits on the shelf next to my trolley. He wants to go somewhere. But this was my last purchase, and as you can see, it's quite an upgrade from this version. So now I can say I have 2 tin litho Ingap Italian trolleys in my collection.
Both of them reverse when you...
No, this is just...
No, the first one.
Oh, yes.
Both ends, I think.
Yeah, it reverses, and this is your... Yeah.
The other one doesn't look like it has much clearance. On the other side.
What now?
The button.
Oh.
The reverse. No, on the other end, it doesn't look like it has a lot of clearance.
Oh, well, it doesn't do anything. It turns the motor.
Looks like it pushes through, right?
Yeah. I've never put power to it. Because the last time I tried that, I burned out a bulb on something that I shouldn't have burned out. It's just a display. They got the arrows to tell you which way it's going. And that's it for me.
Can you move that back onto your box? So
That's
that's
good.
when, yeah, when Teddy sets up, he'll take some space. Okay. Is this
Okay, I'm
yours?
going to jump a little bit smaller, 1/160th. So I wish I had been smart enough to give Sonia the pictures ahead of time. I took the trip of the lifetime to France. Beginning of April, I actually squeezed it in before York and before York and before Ashland Train Day. So
You have to talk louder.
Oh, I'm louder. Okay.
People in the back can't hear.
Hello, back there.
Okay.
I just haven't been in front of a group in a while.
Why's your right arm here, Suzanne?
Yes, you're right.
Oh.
Yes.
So we got to spend some time in Paris, and we did the obligatory. Yeah, we did check them off the list. We went to Versailles. We went to the Eiffel Tower. We drove by the Notre Dame because it was closed.
Arc de Triomphe.
Went by the Arc de Triomphe, saw a whole bunch of different areas where they were literally covering their monuments in order to make skate parks and other things for the Olympics that were coming this summer. The nice part was most everything was freshly gilded, so the golds that may have been suffering from pollution or whatever in the past, they were just amazing. And so I had researched it a little ahead, and I actually found my way through the London Metro to a French train store.
The London Metro.
The only, so what did I say?
You said London
I
Metro.
meant Paris Metro. The reason I meant London was because I actually came home with a couple of neat little buses. This one, it's amazing how things go around the world. This is called a Flixbus. It's made by Germans. When I started Googling it here, Los Angeles came up first. And I was going, wait a minute, I went all the way to Paris to find a German bus maker that sells to Los Angeles. Well, evidently, they sell all over Europe, and they actually sell these to India, and so this is really actually like a world name when it comes to that.
So there's this one.
So the prices in Europe, yes, So this car that I probably would have normally had here for $40 was 65 US. But I got the one, which I love the detail on it anyway, and you can come up and look closer. But you know that O&E is actually based in Richmond now. That's the Ocean Network Express right here at the Richmond.
And it's a Fleischmann.
Yes, this is a Fleischmann.
Wow.
Yep.
Wow.
And I met the owner, Emmanuel, who was very entertaining, and the name of his train shop was O Pullman, A-U Pullman. Now, when you think about France, I mean, all of the buildings, when they did them, they're all uniform. So from the second floor up, they're all tan, they all have similar architecture, so they kind of had that. How do you make your shop look really different? Just kind of like in Tiny Tim's, you've only got that little bit of space. It's all metallic front, molded, and the door is even framed so you feel like you're walking into a Pullman car. And that's where Old Pullman comes from. The other thing that kind of surprised me, though, was everything in his store is behind glass. And I was like, man, I don't know, but it just seems kind of like standoffish or whatever.
There's probably a reason.
I stood and I looked around a little and I was like, where's all the kids' stuff? And he was like, no, this is definitely an adult store. And I said, but we should have more kids involved with this hobby if we don't have kids' stuff in the store. But it was fantastic. It was very welcoming. But then the world is the world. This is a 1947 French-made Citroën bus. Citroën, C-I-T-R-O-E-N. The package says made in China. And then my other big observation over there, and my alluding a bit, knowing, being in Ashland where we are with so much freight, and there's passenger and there's so much activity going on. I went over there. Yes, they have a lot of passenger trains, but on the main highway between Paris and Normandy, which was spectacular, and I'll tell you that on another story. There were a trucking terminal. After trucking, I saw 3-4 new trucking terminals along the highway. They do not ship freight by train. So all the stuff they give us about how terrible we are in the U.S. and we should embrace trains more and all of this.
Watch your right hand.
And they're not, watch my right hand. But they're doing a lot of passenger service, but they're actually not shipping things. They're coming off the containers and they're all going by truck all over. They're actually not going by train, and I think we're amazing with all of that we do everything in a lot of our freight by train, and it's actually more efficient than so poo on the French. It was a wonderful trip, but yes, the world is still made in China. Hi, yeah, Curtis.
Did you take the train from the big train station in Paris and leave? I mean, did you take the train out of that train station?
No, we only took the local Paris Metro.
Okay.
The one with the doors that close on you and gave one lady a bruise. And yeah. So we came into Charles de Gaulle, took the bus. We took a river cruise up the Seine, all the way up pretty close to and took the bus to Normandy. And so it was just a fantastic trip. And so
I wanted to tell you that the first time I was in Paris, my wife and I took a train from Paris up to Brussels. Yeah, and of course that train station, I forget the name of it, but it's the largest in Europe.
Mm-hmm.
It's beautiful, all that glass, the shed trains, it's just gorgeous. And the trains are beautiful and they're very comfortable. But I'll never forget, and they leave on time, so we're sitting in this wonderful coach and they're immediately giving you wine to drink. We pull out of the train station, so now we're outside of the enclosure. And every piece of anything that's out there is covered in graffiti. I mean, even the rocks that they had put in place years ago, I mean, boulders that have this wonderful patina, they were all covered in graffiti. I mean, there wasn't anything that wasn't covered in graffiti. And it was,
tagging it's a worldwide scourge all of a sudden.
but I mean, it was everywhere. I mean,
American tourists, that's what it is.
Everybody.
Is it?
Yeah.
But if you had seen that, it would scar you.
No graffiti allowed on my layout.
So while we were in Paris,
Capital offense.
alluding to some things happening closer around, they decided, the motorcyclists decided that they were going to have a protest because they think there should be more motorcycle lanes. Well, they came at noon, they protested till 5, they snarled up afternoon traffic, but they went home at 5. So they... All right. That's all I have for you. Anyone else would want to see the pictures closer up? And I'll ask Sonia to stick the picture of Emmanuel and his train shop called O Pullman from my trip in Paris in the newsletter. Thanks, guys.
I don't know that, I don't have much time and I don't have much room.
Well, I'll take my little
I had
ones
the
out
best
of
work
here.
ever.
Did you really? Oh.
And I had never been for the pre-show and heard about it when I was Lucas's age, but my dad had to work, like George, Bill, whoever used to go to all those things. So I never got to go. And Tuesday, I left pretty early, traffic wasn't bad, and I came over a hill and I looked down to the I think this is the window, I get them confused, but I look over to the window and I was like, they're actually selling trains in a parking lot. I mean, it was the best feeling ever. So I got out and went inside, and they're right. I'm a standard gauge guy, and loved what I saw. I didn't think I'd ever have this set. And I'm sure many of you that know more about it than actually I do. This is the Lionel original state car set. Turned it around the wrong way. It was made in 1929.
Just in time for the bus.
And I think it was probably made 6 or 7 years. Sure. It was made in brown and it was made in green. The largest, most elaborate cars, there were some reproductions made of it. Like I said, I didn't think I'd have
Did they make all 50 states?
No,
One point
just
two.
4.
Just these 4.
The states.
So why were these states more important?
There's no Virginia, which does cause some consternation.
If you look on there, most of them are major cities.
Yeah.
New York, California, Illinois, and Colorado.
Yeah, I don't know the rationale how they picked. That's a good question, but.
Well, that New York's a state too.
So I.
But Denver was a big city.
Tuesday I went up and there was a very bad accident, so it was sort of hard to navigate getting from the different places. But I did it and looked around and it was great. Wednesday morning I went to the Strasbourg, went to the Toy Train Museum, which is fabulous, and I came across a man who's very knowledgeable about standard gauge. I talked to him for about 2 hours, just constantly. And then I rode the Strasbourg train with Stuart Gordon, which was really nice. I've never done that before. So great little area. And then I came back and I said to someone, I could have spent all my money in 2 hours at the pre-show at the Wyndham Hotel and been perfectly happy and gone back because it was so nice. But, the things they had, I spent some, held on to a good bit of it, and then I went, as I said, with Stuart to the Toy Train Museum, and then I went to the Pennsylvania Railroad Museum, which interested me because of the talk we had about moving the the railroad, and that was great. And for me, and Hill Carter picked up on it, the trains, I didn't ride many trains, and the trains I did were seen. So I didn't have the experience that my father had with them when they actually rode them for a purpose, to get around from place to place. But what they do is they connect people. And for me, the collecting them is a way that I can connect with people. And so I walked around on gates sort of open, so to speak, at noon. I walk around, and the way I do it, I sort of mark things out and think about what I see, what I think it's worth, what I really want. And then I went over to see the two Bills, Bill Wright and Bill Crow, and they're at the end of the line. I don't know what they've done wrong, but if you ever go to their table, I mean, they're like the Pluto, right? They're in the White Hall, the Red Hall. They've been banished for some reason. They're the last table in the last hall. So I go, let me go over there and see them, and they've had the same location for as long as I've been going back, the last 3 or 4 years. And there's another man that's next to him, and I thought he was sort of a dealer, the other man, and of trains. And so I walk in the hall, and I have a pretty good eye, and I see the two Bills, and I look at, and I said, "This is a state set over there." And I usually like to go through the aisles, but I was just going up and down as fast as I could. And then I saw this. It was a really nice man, and he told me that he was from Florida. May have been from New Jersey to begin with, but they retired in Florida. And he said his family had a really good time with it. They brought it out every Christmas, and he said it was time, for somebody else to have it. So, I talked to him at previous shows, and so I like the connection of buying it. And then to pull this, I believe you're supposed to have 381. Is that right, Mr. Wheeler? Probably 381, I think. But they really weren't strong enough, is what I've been told. There's a 408, it's a dual motor.
408.
So I needed, but this electric. And in my head, I'm like, this needs to be pulled by steam. So I was looking, and I came across.
Okay, Teddy, try to speed it up. We're going to run out of time here.
I'm used to the judge telling me that. It doesn't work.
Oh, yeah. Beautiful. 400. Perfect.
Very That to me is, they call it the golden age of trains, so that would, there's certainly better conditioning, but that's the golden age of the golden age of trains right there. So it was a great York for me.
Suzanne and I were just talking about these particular sets. I had a friend that he had one during World War I or II. He said he could run around a car because he didn't want to leave the house. He had one in the cabin.
Thank you. Time to wrap up.